Welcome to Obsessed with Success, starring Russel Morgan.
Hello and welcome back to Obsessed with Success with Russel Morgan, principal attorney and founder of Morgan Legal Group. Russel's deep experience in trust and estate planning, wealth preservation, and succession law makes him a trusted advisor for families, entrepreneurs, and legacy builders alike. I'm Kevin Rosenquist, and today we're diving into how you move beyond basic wills and toward building generational wealth through strategic legal planning. Russel, great to see you.
Kevin, great to be here as always.
So you work with some high net worth clients on some very advanced strategies. How do you define multi-generational or dynasty estate planning?
Multi-generational planning is something that can work for your children and your grandchildren on a very fundamental level. And this can be done by a combination of wills, trusts, and family limited partnerships. The idea here is to create a vehicle that doesn't stop working when you pass away, something that essentially you can control from the grave, that has a constitution, if let's say we're talking about a will or trust, that provides for power, mechanism, control, and most importantly, distribution, as it's all about the money itself, for the next generation. It also works as a tax planning tool. A lot of the multi-generational, what people refer to as Rockefeller trusts, for example, are put in place to avoid things like capital gains. It's a very common tool where people will create, let's say, a will where their children will only have the ability to access income generated from the assets that you're leaving them in your estate. And the grandchildren will then be the actual recipients of the assets themselves. And the reason why we do that is to skip a generation for purposes of capital gains. So this is a simple example of multi-generational legacy planning. And a lot of estate plans just simply fall short. They don't take into consideration a lot of factors that really do affect us on a long-term basis, most importantly, affect our children and affect our legacy. So it's important that even if you're doing your own planning, if you're able to and you have the resources, and us at Morgan Legal, we provide them for free on our website, on our blogs, on our articles on how to plan your estate accordingly. I always advise our clients, take into account your children and your grandchildren at a minimum to make sure that we're able to make the best use of your estate plan.
So while some people just get a will and they think that's good, we're done, we're talking here about a real legacy plan.
Absolutely. And look, there's nothing wrong with having a basic will in place. Legacy planning doesn't necessarily make sense for everyone.
True.
Not everybody wants to do a legacy plan. If I want to leave all of my money to charity, for example, and I have limited resources, where, let's say I have a relatively modest estate and I want to make one bequest to one charity, it may not necessarily make sense. I'm better off just putting a basic will in place. Now, if I am, same example, leaving assets to charity, but I'm leaving something that's generating money, whether it's a brokerage account or a piece of real estate, I can just as easily make that charitable bequest, but also continue for generation after generation. Or in our example, if this charity can no longer exists after I am no longer here, and I've provided for a plan that's continuous, that's legacy built, that it can be distributable by my trustee or by my executor, whoever I designate in charge, to another charity. So the idea is, if it makes sense, we always make sure that we can plan ahead. We can plan for a couple of generations going forward. For some people, it doesn't necessarily mean much value. So it's okay to have a will in place. It's better than not having anything in place. That's the biggest concern we always have is people who pass away, small, medium, or large in terms of family and assets, but just leave a mess. And unfortunately, now the family's left to clean it up. The lawyers have to get involved. Money's being spent when at time really the family should be coming together and focusing on the family. They're now dealing with the legal system.
So for someone looking to truly do what you're talking about, to preserve wealth across generations, what are the legal tools that you deem essential?
Well, first, always advise proper counsel. You have to have a lawyer in your corner. Some of the tools that we use now, and this in part really does depend on value and what the size of your estate is, but it doesn't have to necessarily be complex. A lot of legacy planning can be done through your will by testamentary trust, which is essentially a trust that's created through your last will and testament. It can also be done by inter vivos trust, which is a trust that's separate from your last will and testament that we create while you're alive, transfer assets into while you're alive. And this can be a revocable trust or an irrevocable trust. Now, if we get into the more complex world, we get into the world of family partnerships and limited family partnerships. And these are real generational planning vehicles where we can provide for myself as the creator, as the general partner, my children are as the limited partners who can, in essence, after I'm no longer here, continue and appoint their children who can then take over when I'm no longer present. They are now the general partners and they can continue with their generation.
It's almost like having a business.
Absolutely. And in a perfect world, when we're putting some complex legacy planning in place, a lot of times we're not just segregating, but we're combining a lot of these tools. Certain estates, especially when we're dealing with larger, high net worth individuals or companies, the idea is to limit and minimize your estate over life. So we might employ an irrevocable trust. We might employ lifetime gifting. We may employ a family limited partnership, all in one plan. And they will all function for different purposes. So the more complex, the more reasons there are for it, meaning we may have something a bit more straightforward, like a living trust or a will for your primary residence. But your investments, your brokerage accounts, your real estate investments, your businesses are left through more complex tax planning, generational wealth vehicles.
Okay. Is it difficult for clients to balance control versus protection in these structures?
This is a question I deal with on a daily basis. A lot of asset protection planning, a lot of generational wealth planning, you're constantly facing that struggle of whether I can give up control over my assets. And look, it's a hard pill to swallow for a lot of people. You work your entire life, you build up your net worth, and some lawyer comes around and says, well, now for us to be able to preserve your wealth, you have to put it in the hands of somebody else. And look, that somebody else may very well be your child or your parent or your sibling, but it's still not a good feeling. You're not that person that's in charge of this entity. Now, if you're dealing with a professional, they will show you how you can legitimately control these vehicles without necessarily being the person in charge. But this is the struggle that we face every day. And it's a question that I face with my clients, especially when we get into the older generation, meaning people who are going into retirement that are depending on their assets. These are things that are going to support me. I don't have the energy to work anymore, nor should I have to. And the money that I'm earning off of what I've spent my entire life building, I now have to put into the hands of my son or my daughter or my sister to make sure that I'm still receiving what I need to receive, but the assets are safe. So it comes down to understanding that we can't always have everything we want, right? Sometimes to make this work, we have to give a little to get a little. We put all of the protections legally available in place where even if, let's say, you're not necessarily in control, if you don't like the way who you've appointed is acting, you can remove and replace them.
Right.
If you decide you want to make a change, we make provisions where even though, let's say, we're dealing with something that is otherwise permanent or irrevocable, you can still make certain changes if necessary. Listen, you get into a fight with your kids, especially when we get into old age. It could be your child, it could be a sibling, a family member, a friend, somebody you've spent your whole life growing up with. And now either you've just grown apart or you've gotten into it, right? It's just a unfortunate situation where you fell apart. And those are the things that we're planning for, that even if you lose this element of control over the assets themselves, that the fundamental decisions about who's in charge and who ends up with my assets, you're still able to make change on.
What is meant by the term wealth erosion?
Wealth erosion is a term for a gradual or sudden decline in value of your assets or a company's assets, or a decline in your net worth over time. And it can happen for a variety of reasons. They can be economic, financial, personal factors, and it really ultimately reduces your purchasing power, your financial security, and your investment base overall. And some of the reasons why this happens are not necessarily part of your control. You could lose a substantial portion of your estate to inflation. For example, inflation it erodes the real value of today's money and today's savings. And if your investments don't outpace inflation, your wealth declines in real time. Another reason can be simply poor investment performance. If you're speculating on the stock market, or real estate investment or other assets, and unfortunately they don't perform, this can cause wealth erosion. Unfortunately, another major reason why we see it is spendthrift or excessive spending or debt. And simple, plain English, just someone who's living beyond their means, or somebody who's accruing high interest liabilities. So there are reasons why we plan for things like that, and we incorporate spendthrift protection in a lot of what we do. And another factor why wealth erosion can take place can be taxes. You sell a piece of property, for example. You bought it for $10, you sell it for $20. You're incurring capital gains. And look, that capital gains tax is large. It could be an inheritance tax, or it could just be a really poorly structured tax planning tool. All of this can eat into your accumulated wealth. Now, there have been some unfortunate reasons, like, for example, the '08 financial crisis. Recessions can drastically reduce asset values. Currency depreciation. A lot of people speculate on foreign currencies. And today, it can be worth X. And tomorrow, a drop in value erodes the wealth in the local currency tremendously. And you can go from millions of dollars to thousands of dollars literally overnight. So it just speaks to how dynamic someone's portfolio is and how easy it is to make and lose and really make back your wealth. Some of it is really outside of our control. A lot of the reasons are unfortunate, but they are within our control. So we have to be mindful of not only our investment, but our expenses. We have to move with the markets. We have to watch what's going on around us. We have to understand that our life consists of outside factors and decisions. And the decisions we make impact our wealth. And those outside influences can also impact our wealth. And that's where we need to balance the equities daily to make sure that we're constantly improving and increasing and diversifying to avoid things like wealth erosion.
We talk a lot on this show about, other lawyers. You talk about what other lawyers can do to help their practice to be better, whatnot. For any lawyers listening, how can they break into sort of this space we're talking about and start offering a deeper value than just what they've been doing?
To keep it really simple, aside from showing that you're good at what you do, it's always about being a resource to your community above and beyond everything else. If people know they can come to you with questions, you'll inherently drive business. Of course, you have to be good at what you do. You have to deliver a solid business. You have to deliver solid product. But most importantly, you have to make resources available and they're free. And this is the most important part because you're bringing in people who may not become a client today. They may not become a client tomorrow, but they'll remember you and they'll remember what they learned from you. And you don't know how what you're providing, how the educational materials, the resources you're putting out there are impacting other people. I can't tell you how many phone calls I've received personally from people who thanked me just for making things that other lawyers are hiding from their clients readily available on our social media, on our websites, on our webinars, on print, on podcast. And they don't necessarily become a client, but you'll get a referral. They'll tell their friends, they'll tell their family, and they will tell their friends and family. And that's how you build your reputation. So it's always going to be first and foremost delivering the best product and service on the market. But not everybody has the money for marketing and advertising and brand management, especially when you're just starting out. So being a public resource, being an educational resource, that's a value add for everyday people. And they may not be able to see you today, but they definitely will remember you tomorrow.
I like that. I think that's spot on. All right. Well, whether you're building a firm or a family legacy, the lesson is the same. Plan with precision, act with purpose. Visit morganlegalny.com for more insights or call 888-529-1315. You can find us on social at Morgan Legal NY. And don't forget to subscribe and share Obsessed with Success with someone planning for tomorrow. Russell, it's always great having you here. Thanks so much for your time.
Kevin, great to be here as always. See you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.